Hello everyone, and welcome to our first YouTube video. It's the May 2018 meeting of the ITD Photo Club, and we are trying this new venue because Facebook Live's been giving us a little bit of grief. So I've decided that this is going to be, we're going to try and use this one. The live stream tonight didn't work because I applied for the live stream, but it takes YouTube 24 hours to authenticate me. So we'll have live stream for the next one. Hopefully this will take care of the folks that were worried about having to use Facebook for seeing the classes. This is YouTube, at least it's a video platform, and we'll be able to get things rolling along a little bit better. So tonight's topic is long exposure and night photography. This is a request I've had from quite a few users, and so I'm going to give a brief coverage because remember this is a short video and it's not in depth. We can go in depth into some of the other things later. Some of the sub texts of this we can go in depth in another lesson. But for now, we're just going to have a general overview. We will have our monthly photo challenge, and I will critique our last month's challenge, which was Spring Has Sprung. We have quite a few entries and it's very good. So, long exposure and night photography. Generally, we're talking about shutter speeds that are longer than can be comfortably held by hand or steadily held by hand. That requires the use of a tripod or something like that. Usually, there are some exceptions. Okay, but for 30 seconds, if you do an exposure that's 30 seconds or longer, you will see things in the image that the eye does not see. And that's because the camera does not see the same way the eye does. It actually records everything. So, whereas if we see a bright light shoot across our field of vision and we might see we might see a streak behind it, but the streak quickly fades. Not so with a camera. The camera sensor will record the streak and record it faithfully all the way across the screen. If you've ever seen pictures of streets at night with traffic flowing, you see they look like streaks of light, and that's from the headlights and the taillights, just painting their lines along the roads. Okay. But this technique of using exceedingly long shutter speeds does allow us to capture a variety of images that normally would not be available to us if we used handheld photography. First among them is astrophotography. Hopefully you can see in the video the stars in the sky above the cabin. All the photographs in this set, by the way, are taken by me, so I have tried all these techniques. The next one is a very popular one, especially in the online forums and social media, is cityscapes. In this case, I have a panorama composed of several long exposures. What's interesting about this is that if you look at towards the right of the image, you see that the sun has set, and it's because it took so much time for me to take the bracketed set of images to create the panorama that the sun had set while I was taking it. So by the time I got to the Intrepid there, it was no, that's not the Intrepid. Well, by the time I got to the right of the image, the sun had already set, so we lost that golden glow in the sky. But it's kind of interesting because it makes it look more spherical. So it's very interesting. Another very popular one is fireworks. Okay. Disney is a typical example of trying to capture fireworks. And it's possible to do these handheld, but you're usually better off with a tripod. But that's a little tricky getting one of those into Disney. Storm photography, if you're careful when you go outside, you might get lucky and be able to catch a bolt of lightning, which I will explain how that method happens. Now, a lot of these methods also rely a lot on luck. and serendipity, because you don't know when a lightning bolt's going to go, and unless you know the guy who's shooting the fireworks, you don't know when the fireworks are going up. The last area is something called light painting, where you will actually either directly or indirectly draw images with a light source in the field of vision of the camera. Okay. In this case, this is a direct light painting situation where I had the light source pointing at the camera. This was using a little tool called a pixel stick, which is a 6-foot rod that has 200 programmable RGB LEDs, and I can load it up with all kinds of patterns and things. It's very interesting. So going a little more in depth into this, first of all, astrophotography, which is shooting the night skies and the stars. Depending on how you do it, if you want to do it the classical way, exposures can take up to an hour or more. Can involve the use of telescopes or the use of what's called an equatorial mount, which is borrowed from astronomy, and it's a special kind of tripod head that goes on a very heavy tripod that has a set of motors that will rotate your camera in tune with the rotation of the Earth, so that the stars remain still relative to the camera. Sometimes you've seen online that people have these pictures of the night skies, and the stars have formed like this great circle, like concentric rings, right? Those are called star trails. And that's what happens when you shoot a long exposure or stacked shorter exposures without an equatorial mount. The stars move because the Earth is rotating. It's most prevalent if you point the camera towards north. Another tip is to set your white balance to fluorescent when you want to try and catch the stars. The fluorescent white balance captures starlight much more effectively than any of the other ones. Okay. Also, you should be far away from the city and its great big balls of light pollution. Any city or metropolitan area will have all kinds of lights, street lights. The buildings will be lit up. They'll have, and some places more than others. Las Vegas, for example, Busan, Korea. So another one that lights up like crazy. New York itself is extremely lit up. Okay, that's the next one, which is cityscapes. But anyway. If you're trying to catch the stars, it's really difficult to catch the stars over a city because of the amount of light that is being put out by the city. And you also have to do this on a cloudless night because the clouds will invariably get in the way. And if you're in the northern or southern latitudes away from the equator, the moon won't be that much of a factor, but being on a moonless night would be even better, because the moon is the brightest object in the night sky, and it will mess the shot up. Now, if you're in the higher or lower latitudes, the moon will be much closer to the horizon when it does its thing, as opposed to on the equator where it will pass overhead. Okay, so keep that in mind, since we live in Florida and we're close to the equator. So the last tip is, if you're going to be doing a night sky, I would suggest you use a wide angle lens, like a 21 millimeter or wider. Be aware that the wider the lens, the shorter the amount of time you have before star trails start forming. This is an odd little function of focal length. Because the wide lens takes in so much more area when it's capturing an image, you will start to notice the movement of the stars more than if you did it with a telephoto lens. Again, usually you want to catch some piece of foreground interest. It could be rocks, trees, whatever, a home, you never know. And then the night sky overhead, where where your wide angle comes into play, because you want to capture as much of the night sky as you can. Moving on to the next topic is cityscapes. Cityscapes are actually very popular because they're not that hard to do. As I mentioned before, cities generate a heck of a lot of light. Some of them generate so much light that you can actually do this whole bit handheld. I've done it numerous times handheld, and it works out very, very nicely. Although you will get some cleaner results at lower ISOs and using a tripod. But like I said, if you're traveling and you're going to a big city somewhere, they might not be too keen on you carrying a tripod around unless you're doing it on purpose and they know you're up to it. But anyway, if you want to have like the light streaks of cars in the road, then you will need to use a tripod, because you will need to give it time to allow the cars to move through the scene, leaving streaks with their headlights and taillights. Another interesting function of this is if you are on the street yourself and there are pedestrians and they're moving constantly, a long exposure will make them vanish. Like 30 seconds or more. If they don't sit still for those 30 seconds and they're moving constantly, they will vanish out of the scene. It's pretty amazing. If you do it shorter than that, they might be blurs in the bottom of the scene. But if you do it longer, they will probably get themselves deleted out of the scene. It's a very odd little factoid about doing long exposures. One other tip is to go, when you bring your images into post, is to adjust a setting called the black level. And this basically works with the left side of the histogram. So it's working with the black values on this one. I'm doing this with my right hand because it's left to you. So it's doing it on this side over here. It only affects the deep black values. You want to increase your black so your night sky becomes nice and dark. Not too dark that you lose any stars you may catch or moonlight, but dark enough so that it doesn't look hazy, because the light given off by the buildings includes a glow, which creates a sort of light fog. And by adjusting the black levels, you can remove the light fog and make it look nice and contrasty. Give you that Tron look. Fireworks requires a tripod, and unless you know, and some luck, unless you know the guy who's launching the fireworks, or you're launching them yourself. Commercial fireworks are usually held very far away from the audience, like on the order of half a mile or more. So you're going to have to kind of guess, set it up on a tripod, and then fire a burst and see what you get. The longer the exposure, the longer the trails left by the fireworks. The different types of fireworks will make very interesting patterns, and you may want to experiment with different ones throughout the night of the show and see what you get. By upping your ISO to a tolerable level, and remember, in order to find out what's tolerable, you have to test your camera by creating a small still life scene, lighting it, putting your camera on a tripod, set it to aperture priority, put it to manual focus, and then start at ISO 100 and take a shot. Then increase it to ISO 200 and take a shot. And then ISO 300 and take a shot. And do this all the way through the range of your camera. Then bring those images into your photo software, whatever you use, and start looking at them at 100%. When the images get so grainy or scrabbly that you can't stand it, you now know what ISO you don't want to use on your camera, and you're given the range of usable ISO. Okay, so ISO 400 to 800 will usually get you the most details for fireworks, because fireworks are pretty bright, and will get you enough shutter speed that you can capture, you don't get the traily kind, because some of them start to look like palm trees after a little bit, and which is neat, but maybe you didn't want to catch them looking like palm trees. Maybe you wanted to look like fireworks. So the next one is storm photos. This requires waterproof or weatherproof gear, because you don't want to ruin your camera unless you're You got an exceptionally clean window, and it's not a rainy night, but it might be like a stormy night, or the storms might be in the distance, and you're going to try and catch some lightning in the distance. That's going to be like fireworks. You don't know what's going on, so you're going to be doing some long exposures and hope that they throw the conditions are right and lightning gets thrown at the direction you're looking. That one uses serendipity a lot. Okay, so the last one is light painting, and light painting can be done. This is like when you were kids and your parents took out a camera, and then you had like a sparkler, and then you waved the sparkler in the air, and in the photograph you actually left lines in the air. Well, yeah, you could use a sparkler. You could also use flashlights. You can use a variety of things. If you point the light source at the camera that's taking the long exposure, you'll be able to draw directly in the air. If you point it at some object that the camera is looking at, and the light source is facing in the same direction, you won't see the light source, but you will see the effect the light source had on the object it illuminated. So it's possible using this technique that you combine it. Let's say you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's like some shack or something with some rocks, and you're taking a night sky shot, and you got that long exposure going, but you want to be able to see that cabin. So what you do is, while you're taking that long exposure on the equatorial mount or whatever, or maybe you're just using high ISO, and it's like a 20-second shot or something like that. Take a flashlight, a bright one, and then you just start waving it over the various different objects in the foreground to light them up a little bit so that they will be illuminated in your shot, giving it balance to whatever you're doing in the background with the sky. It's a very nice technique. Okay. Now, there's another one where you've probably seen it, where people do flame circles. If you guys saw Doctor Strange, the effect that they used when they were opening portals through other dimensions is what I'm talking about. That was computer generated. But you can actually generate this in the real world. But I highly recommend you don't do it. This is called steel wool photography. Okay? Where you take a wad of steel wool, just like that one down there, okay? Wrap it in, like, say, a hard wire, like a coat hanger, okay? And then you set it on, and then you attach it to a cable, a metal cable, or a chain. You set the steel wool on fire, and then you start spinning it around you. Now what happens is that steel wool is on fire, but as you're spinning it through the air, you're forcing oxygen into the fire, and you're increasing the heat. This is as if you were at a forge and you started pumping air into the fire as much as you could with either a bellows or a fan. That's going to get really, really hot. And at some point, it's going to get so hot that little gobbets of the steel wool will melt and fly off and shoot little trails of sparks, as you can see in the bottom image down below. Okay? It looks super cool. And I'll admit it does look super cool. But it's also extremely dangerous. Okay? Anything flammable in the area will catch fire unless you took preparations. Like if you're standing on grass, you have to make sure you hose down that grass really soaking wet so that it doesn't catch fire. Okay? Or you're standing on sand or asphalt or something that it doesn't burn. You'll have to be careful with what you're wearing, because if you're wearing something that's light and easily flammable, it will catch fire too. Okay? This is very serious. So, unless you're really adept at handling flammable objects, I don't suggest you try this. Let me give you a reason why. In 2016, a photographer went out on the Tamiami Trail to a historic building called Monroe Station. The image on the left shows the photograph taken by the photographer. Super cool. He stood on the roof of the wooden building, and he spun the steel wool, and he sprayed sparks everywhere. The image on the right shows the result. Monroe Station caught fire. It's a historical site, didn't have anybody inside of it, and burned to ashes. They couldn't stop it. It was him and one other guy. They couldn't stop the fire. Eventually he turned himself in, but he destroyed a national park, part of a national park. So steel wool is cool. Have somebody else do it. I don't want you guys doing it because I don't want you to get hurt. So that kind of covers our topics for this evening. So the next topic is our photo challenge for the month of May. And as if you couldn't guess, the May challenge is Children of the Night. I want you guys to take a night shot. No steel wool. New work only. So now we go to our last part, which is critique and review. And we actually have some stuff for critique and review. So, leaving the slideshow, we have, ta-da, our Flickr pool. By the way, Flickr news. In case you hadn't heard, Flickr has been bought by SmugMug, a competitor to Flickr. They purchased it from Yahoo, and they are getting ready to merge the two. I believe they did this because they wanted to acquire Flickr for its social aspect, because I've used SmugMug before and they have great galleries, but they're not that hot in the social aspect of it, where they're having conversations and groups and what the sort of the things we're doing here on Flickr. So I will keep you posted as to what's going on with that. But as of right now, they've been saying, oh, hey, we're going to be SmugMug soon. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, going on to our group photographs, we have, first up for the Spring is Sprung, we have Anna Sylvia's Lizard and Flower. Lizard smelling the flower. This is a great shot. The lighting is spot on. You can see like a little bit of reflection in the eye of the lizard. And there's a lot of detail. You can see the lizard's scales very clearly. And the flower has maintained its detail as well. Okay? There's a lot of nice contrast between the lizard, the flower, and the background. And it's just a generally well-composed shot. Nicely done. Next up is a water lily bloom shot by Mayrim. It's a kind of a soft pastel. Nice use of bokeh to isolate the subject. But it's kind of a little blah because it's like right in the middle. Sorry. Had you moved it to one side or the other to try and get it into the golden mean, you would have had a much better image composed if you had moved it to one of the golden mean spots. The golden mean can be approximated if you activate the 3x3 grid in your camera's viewfinder, and if you put your subject on the intersections, one of the 4 intersections. Okay, we will go over this again in the composition class. Next up, we have Mayrim's Orchids and Air Plants. Again, straight up centered in the middle. Could use a little more compositional composition, or at least a little cropping to kind of bring the flowers off to one side. Next up is these really interesting leaves. Problem here is that the center of the leaf little bit out of focus, and that's kind of hard, especially when you're taking stuff close up, because depth of field gets really cut back, and you kind of have to really turn up the aperture in order to be able to capture things with proper focus. It's still a nice shot. Again, could have used a little compositional adjustment to either the right or the left, up and down. It's just like right there in the middle. So next up is, now this one's a little bit better as far compositionally. It has some nice colors to it. There's bokeh separating the tulip bud and the dragonfly from the backdrop. So it's a very nice combination, and it does a lot more justice to the flower than the previous shot. So this one is compositionally much better than the previous ones, because the bud is in the upper left spot of the golden mean. So that's very good. Okay. This one is Miriam's, not Miriam's, but Miriam's, which looks to be some sort of blossoms. They may be cherry blossoms or something like that. I can't see down here. It's just flowers on a tree. They might be cherry blossoms. I don't know. They're pink. They're kind of all over the place. So compositionally, we have a little bit of a trying to figure out what's going on here. Still a nice photo. There's nice bokeh in the background, but compositionally, it's all over the place. I'm not saying mine are any better. I didn't have the opportunity to do some very good ones, but I'll show you what I have later on. Okay. This one with the turtle, however, is very nice compositionally. Very, very nice. Turtle's in the golden mean. The only issue here is that color-wise, the turtle is dark just like the background. So it's a little hard to separate him at first glance. The actual log he's standing on is much brighter than he is. And then you've got this branch in the foreground that is, unfortunately, it's kind of distracting. Had it been a little more like unlike the little branch that's all the way in the corner, this one is really distracting because it's cutting right through on one of the diagonal rules. So it's kind of working against you at this point. But I know I say to have foreground elements, but you don't want the foreground elements to steal the show from your actual subject. Next up, we have Ivalice's water lilies at the Kampong. Okay. This one's very nice. The color of the lily is a little bit weak compared to the contrast of the pads behind it. Composition is good, but you have, like I said, I would have maybe isolated the lily a little bit in post and saturated the lily a little more than the background, just kind of make it stand out a little bit more, because there's not enough bokeh in the shot to really handle the separation. Next one up is another water lily. This one, however, since the leaves of the water lilies around it are green, the pastel lavender color of the lily actually works really well. So this one works a lot better than the previous one. A little judicious cropping from the right side, bringing up the right corner, will have thrown the lily flower right into the golden mean, just a tiny bit. Taking off maybe half an inch on one side would have put it right in the perfect spot. But it does, and it would draw your eye more towards it. Next up is these little bell wind chimes with the stained glass rooster. These are okay. Had you shot this as a portrait instead of, had you shot or recropped it to being a portrait aspect, being vertical as opposed to landscape, it would have been a lot more interesting, because then the rule of diagonals would have really worked for you, drawing your eye through the bells all the way to the rooster. Okay, it's a very nice shot. Nice bokeh separation from the background, but like I said, either recrop it to a portrait landscape. Portrait landscape. Ooh, that was good. To portrait orientation as opposed to the landscape orientation, to tighten up the shot and get that rule of diagonals working for you. Okay. This one's interesting set of color contrasts. The issue here is that the image has, it could have used a slight bit more depth of field in the foreground. It's like the front veins of the leaf are in focus, but as you get back towards the back of the leaf, it's starting to blur a little bit. And that kind of detracts a little bit from the image, because I'm like trying to see what's going on here. But still, it's still a nice image. Like I said, if you had a little, just like maybe one stop more of aperture, you would have gotten this a lot cleaner, and it would have been a much better shot. This one has some nice color contrast, but again, it's in the middle of the screen as opposed to being in one of the compositional positions. Again, nice mixes of colors. almost abstract. If you'd gotten closer, it would have been really abstract, and that would have been kind of cool. But that would have required, like, say, a macro lens or something like that, or an extension tube that would allow you to get a lot closer to the subject matter. These are mine, just to show, just to say that I participated and to give some folks some ideas. I didn't do too good a job on this one. I could have cropped this a little more judiciously. I did have the butterfly in the shot, and I have the color separating it from the background, but I should have cropped it a little bit better myself. This one, again, the color is all over the place, just for lovers of flowers. No real compositional work on this one. I'm being hard on myself too. The bougainvilleas have that nice diagonal working on them, and the bokeh separating them from the background. Although I wasn't using a terribly fast lens, this was an f4 lens, so it wasn't very fast, so that I couldn't get the kind of bokeh separation I was looking for. And it doesn't have much close focusing unless I had an adapter to it that'll let it get a lot closer to it. So, you know, I did okay on this one, but y'all did a lot better than I did. And that's Boris's shot from the previous challenge. So I'm going to say that the winner for this month's challenge is going to be come on. Anna Sylvia's lizard smelling the flower. So congratulations, Anna Sylvia. You were the winner of the May monthly challenge. Okay, so that does it for May. If you have any suggestions of topics, please let me know. Send me an email, post it on the Facebook group. This video will be uploaded to YouTube, and I will post links in the Facebook group, and also email the link to the video for those folks that don't use Facebook. Like I said, if you have any suggestions for next month's topic, please let me know. I'm willing to take requests, and we can concentrate on something. Be aware, when September rolls around, I will be restarting the beginner classes for anyone who wants to start fresh, and we'll be going forward from there. So see you guys next month, and thanks for watching.